Take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
CannabisRadio.com presents The Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
Hey, this is great, man.
Now, here's your host, Radical Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. It is Monday, November 21st, 2016, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. And it's a brand new day, a brand new administration, a brand new set of legal states we get to deal with. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for being here. I know I've been gone for a while, and yes, Reverend Richard, I am really live. I am back, and no worse for wear, but a little bit disappointed in some of the things that are happening in this country. We'll get to all of that coming up here on today's show, but first, let's celebrate. We've got more legality for marijuana in the United States of America, and for that matter, the world, than ever before. We are winning the war on drugs, even if we might lose a battle here or there. For those of you wondering where I've been, well, we had our marijuana election night in Los Angeles, California. It was a highlight of my career. I was thrilled to be able to do this, and later on in the show, we'll talk a bit about it. Some of the behind-the-scenes stuff that went on that made it pretty exciting and nail-biting from my perspective. For those of you who got to watch or listen to the feed, thanks for joining us on Marijuana Election Night. At least our election was pretty cool. It was dampened a little bit when we got done, and the folks there in California were watching the returns showing that Donald Trump will be our next president. We'll talk about that on the show today as well. But I'm trying not to let the election of Donald Trump sully my memory of the greatest marijuana election night in history. We went 8 for 9, losing only in Arizona, and that's pretty remarkable. The other thing that's pretty remarkable is that all of the states that voted on marijuana, all 9 of them, cast more votes in favor of marijuana reform than for any of the presidential candidates. Even Arizona, where it lost, they voted more for legal marijuana than any presidential candidate. And some of those states, like North Dakota and Arkansas, that passed medical marijuana, states that voted very heavily for Donald Trump, kind of give us a clue that perhaps we are past a partisan point, to put an alliterative spin on it. Perhaps we are past a partisan point in America where marijuana is no longer a partisan issue. Perhaps we're to the point now where both parties are going to recognize the legalization of marijuana. At least we got a hope, considering what we're getting out of the Trump administration transition team and some of their nominations. Let's get down to what we're going to talk about on the show today. Of course, we start with our cannabis radio news. And we'll run down some of the headlines that we've missed over the past couple of weeks. I just got back from the Oregon Marijuana Business Conference down in Ashland, Oregon. Ed Rosenthal did a keynote speech. Tommy Chong did an extended interview. And Rob Patridge, the head of the OLCC that regulates marijuana here in the state of Oregon, he spoke as well. Plus, there were presentations on branding and trademarking, intellectual property, taxes, packaging, labeling, testing. Everything you'd want to know, they went over it there in Ashland. So we'll talk about that in hour 2. Also on the show, in Behind the Headlines, we'll talk about the Trump nomination of Senator Jeffrey Beauregard Sessions as a potential attorney general. I thought I had a nightmare with Chris Christie as attorney general. Turns out I'm not thinking quite darkly enough. In our drug war data mining, we'll look at marijuana election night and give you some of the details, the statistics, the final results from the election. In government at work, we'll talk about Weed's nightmare scenario and how states' rights could be upheld to our detriment. I'll tell you how that works out. In our radical rant, I want to tell you the story of a man named Chijioke Stephen Obioha, who died on Friday. And in an hour 2, we'll take your calls at 650-LEGAL-MJ.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
Cannabis use isn't the only thing growing. So are we. Grow with us. CannabisRadio.com.
While the feds and state are doing their dance, you still need to transact business and manage your cash. Go professional and let your customers pay with PayQuick. They pay you and they earn rewards points. PayQuick connects to your bank account for free and secures all of your transactions. And with PayQuick, you can pay your producers and processors for free. Plus, it pays to have it because it makes depositing your cash safe and so easy. No cops, no crooks, just compliance and comfort, knowing you have your cannabis business in check with PayQuick. PayQuick, the safe and easy way to pay. PayQuick.com.
It's time to Hemp Present
with Inadina Stanger.
I say to you with all the fervor of my soul that God intended men to be free. Rebellion against tyranny is a righteous cause. And I believe that with every ounce of my soul, we are fighting a righteous cause because people need nature.
Marijuana! Hemp Present, only on Cannabis Radio. Sweet sativa.
You can find Radical Russ online everywhere. Gmail, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, YouTube, SoundCloud, Snapchat, LinkedIn, and Boise State University's 2400 baud modem bulletin board system from 1985. It's time for the Cannabis Radio News. Covering the latest headlines in consumer cannabis, medical marijuana, and industrial hemp. Cannabis Radio News is now available exclusively at CannabisRadio.com. Now your marijuana headlines in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. This is Cannabis Radio News.
This is your Cannabis Radio News for Monday, November 21st, 2016. Cannabis won big in the U.S. elections, with 8 out of 9 states succeeding at passage of significant marijuana reforms. California, Nevada, Massachusetts, and Maine all passed initiatives to legalize the adult personal use of marijuana, with California setting the new record high for such votes at 56.2%. Florida, Arkansas, and North Dakota all moved to protect the medical use of marijuana under a doctor's recommendation, while Montana voted to expand its medical marijuana program to include dispensary sales. Only Arizona's attempt to legalize adult personal use failed to pass, with just 48% support. With these wins, 1 in 5 Americans now lives in a legal marijuana state, and another 2 in 5 live where medical marijuana use is protected. Police departments are relaxing age-old standards for accepting recruits, from lowering educational requirements to forgiving some prior drug use to try to attract more people to their ranks. The changes are designed to deal with decreased interest in a job that offers low pay, rigorous physical demands, and the possibility of getting killed on duty, all while under intense public scrutiny. There's also the question of how to encourage more minorities to become police officers. There's no national standard for becoming an officer. It's left up to each state to set requirements. In general, prior drug use or past brushes with the law, however minor, have been enough to bar someone from becoming an officer. Amid the push to diversify, many police departments question whether those long-held military-style standards are the best ways to attract officers able to relate to communities and diffuse tensions. Some 30 countries and cities in Oregon approved some type of marijuana businesses in the election, and officials in those communities must now establish rules for every step in the production and supply chain. When voters legalized recreational marijuana statewide 2 years ago, the communities, from the cowboy town of Pendleton to Sweet Home in the Willamette Valley, opted out. But many switched it up this month, voting to allow at least some form of the pot industry, including medical marijuana. Local officials must determine operating hours for marijuana retailers, growing farms, and processors. They also were trying to figure out whether the businesses should be allowed near parks and what sort of security and odor controls the businesses must provide. Opponents of a state ruling that would prevent bars and many restaurants in Denver from offering on-site marijuana consumption said the ruling would overturn a law approved by voters and force people to sneak around while they use pot and consume alcohol. The new rule announced Friday bars liquor license holders from applying for a permit to allow the consumption of pot. The Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment said using alcohol and marijuana together increases impairment. Mason Tvert, a spokesman for the National Marijuana Policy Project, said the measure approved by voters this month would allow servers to keep track of customers who drink and consume pot products instead of forcing them to go outside or hide behind closed doors. Tvert said the ruling was pushed by the liquor industry trying to protect its turf because they wanted people drinking alcohol and not using other products. The liquor industry and other groups, including Mothers Against Drunk Driving, expressed concerns over safety and liability. Cannabis sales in Colorado set a new record for the third straight month, while sales in Washington have also reached new heights. Colorado marijuana shops in September reeled in $127.8 million in sales of medical and recreational cannabis. So far this year, sales have topped $974.3 million in 9 months, about $22 million shy of the $996.2 million revenue totaled for the entirety of 2015. The September 2016 sales generated about $19.2 million in tax revenue for the state, bringing the year-to-date total for taxes and licensing fees to $144.2 million. Also new for 2016 was the implementation of a new law that increased the daily purchase limit for non-residents to 1 ounce, up from a quarter ounce. That law took effect in June. In Washington state, sales of marijuana products have for the first time surpassed $200 million in a quarter. In July, the state closed medical marijuana shops, making all sales go through recreational storefronts. This has been your Cannabis Radio News for Monday, November 21st, 2016. I'm Russ Belville.
We don't limit how much you smoke, and we don't limit where you listen. Cannabis Radio is now on iTunes, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio.
Cash?
Sorry.
I don't carry around cash, and I don't want to use the ATM and pay surcharges.
You don't need to carry cash. Haven't you heard about PayQuick?
Okay, tell me about PayQuick.
It's the safe and easy way to pay. It works just like your debit card to securely pay for your purchase, and it gives you rewards points every time you use it.
Nice.
PayQuick, the safe and easy way to pay. PayQuick.com.
NORMAL stands for Responsible Adult Cannabis Use. If cannabis use is causing problems in your life, consider taking a break or seeking medical assistance. Consider ceasing cannabis use if you have a family history of mental illness. Don't drive or operate heavy machinery while impaired by cannabis use. Cannabis use is not without risks, even though the risks may be far less than those posed by legal drugs. You're listening to Radical Russ on the Russ Belville Show.
At Herbie's Cannabis Seeds, we pride ourselves on bringing you the best quality seeds from the world's most respected cannabis seed producers, all at the lowest online prices. You can find Herbie's seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. All cannabis seeds are sold as souvenirs and as a means of preserving cannabis genetics. Herbie's Seeds in no way intends to condone, promote, or incite the use of illegal or controlled substances. We strongly urge all prospective customers to check their national laws prior to placing an order. Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. Proud sponsors of the Russ Belville Show and 420 Radio.
The world of cannabis is evolving at a frenetic pace. The Russ Belville Show gets behind the headlines to take a deeper look at breaking news in our Cannabis Focus.
Today in the Cannabis Focus, we want to take a look at the controversial nomination of Jeffrey Beauregard Sessions, the Alabama senator who Donald Trump has tapped to become the next attorney general. Now, if you don't follow politics too closely, let me give you some insight as to the positions of Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions. This guy could probably be the worst attorney general we could have picked. I know we've been looking at the possibility of an attorney general Chris Christie or an attorney general Rudy Giuliani. I didn't even stop to think of an attorney general Jeff Sessions, and that guy trumps, pardon the pun, either one of those other two choices. Jeff Sessions is probably the worst choice we could have. John Hudak from the Brookings Institute, a frequent guest on our show, is quoted as saying, "It should scare the hell out of the marijuana industry," end quote. Looking back at Sessions' record, we don't have to look too far back to get some clues as to how he might be as Attorney General. The U.S. Senate Drug Caucus had a hearing in April about the Justice Department and the Cole memo and the lax enforcement of federal marijuana laws when it comes to Colorado and Washington state. Republicans, conservatives, and social folks that are opposed to marijuana legalization have called hearings like this to lambaste the Justice Department for turning a blind eye to marijuana legalization, for not enforcing federal laws. And Jeff Sessions stood and spoke to that by saying, quote, "We need grown-ups in charge of Washington to say that marijuana is not the kind of thing that ought to be legalized. It ought not to be minimized, that it's in fact a very real danger. To give that away and make it socially acceptable creates the demand, increased demand that results in people being addicted or impacted adversely." End quote. Grown-ups need grown-ups in charge because allowing marijuana to be legally bought and sold is somehow juvenile to Jeff Sessions. He somehow thinks that making it legal increases the demand for cannabis, which it increases the availability, but not the demand. People have wanted cannabis for centuries now. And this idea that it's a real danger, he listed all these stats on accidents and traffic fatalities, which we have debunked so many times on this show. The statistics that rely on the marijuana in someone's system, which all tells us that they are marijuana consumers, not that they were impaired, not that they were high at the time, not that the marijuana caused the accident in any way. Hell, doesn't even tell us these folks were necessarily the driver at the time. But they use these statistics to try to scare people who don't know too much about the issue. Another comment that we got from Jeff Sessions was one where he said that good people don't smoke marijuana. Good people don't smoke marijuana. That's the guy who's going to be the Attorney General in charge of the Department of Justice, the department that issued the Cole memo that says to the federal government, hey, let's not use our scarce resources busting state legal marijuana. Folks, that's just a memo. The next Justice Department can rescind that memo at any time. And you can bet that's something Jeff Sessions would probably do. Now, looking farther back in time, Jeff Sessions was once nominated to become a federal judge. This was back in 1986 when Boise State first put in the blue turf. Trivia buffs. President Ronald Reagan nominated him for a federal judge position. The Republican-controlled Senate Judiciary Committee at the time rejected his nomination because of his history of racially charged comments and actions. At the time that Sessions was rejected, he was one of only 2 judicial nominees who'd ever been rejected in half a century. That's how this guy was so racist, or appeared to be so racist. A Republican-controlled committee rejected him. Now, in that testimony, and there's a great excerpt between him and then Senator Joe Biden, former colleagues said Mr. Sessions had referred to the NAACP, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and other civil rights groups as, quote, un-American and, quote, communist-inspired, end quote. A African-American federal prosecutor back then, a fellow by the name of Tom Figures, testified that Sessions had once referred to him as boy, and testified that Sessions said the Ku Klux Klan was fine, quote, until I found out they smoked pot, end quote. Now, Sessions said that was a joke. He was just joking about that, and you can kind of understand the absurdity of such a joke. You know, I thought the KKK was okay until I found out they were pot smokers. You know, being absurd, of course, because the KKK terrorizes people and burns crosses and lynches people, right? You can see the absurdity, but consider the context. The context of that joke and the talking about the KKK at the time, as Senator Biden brought up, the context was that a man had just been lynched, that a black man had just been lynched. So yeah, it might have been a joke, but there is the concept of too soon or out of, bad taste, even if it was just a joke. So here's someone that Republicans would not approve as a federal judge because he's too racist, but now...
I spent the last 2 years of high school in a daze.
But now we get to have this guy as Attorney General? It's like I told you, folks, it's not Donald Trump you have to worry about. It's the people Donald Trump will put in charge, because Donald Trump ain't going to be doing much. Donald Trump's going to be flitting back and forth from Washington to New York. And all these people he put in charge, those are the ones that are going to run our lives, folks, and it's not looking pretty.
Maui Wowie, Acapulco Gold, California Kush. Our strains stretch everywhere too. This is the Cannabis Radio Network.
Oh, let the marijuana llama tell you something now about a game for your phone gonna make you say, wow! The game's about the game of growing cannabis for cash. Grow the seed, sell the bud, put the savings in the stash. Little by little, your empire grows large. Put the big celebrities inside your entourage. You can choose to play with Snoop or me or Cheech and Chong, Cypress Hill, Willie Nelson, Wiz Khalifa with a bong. The name of the game is hemping, that's the point. Download and play while you light yourself a joint. The business of cannabis should be no crime. Hemp Inc. is even hot-proofed by the man who run High Times. Oh yeah? Get it on Android and iOS today. Marijuana llama out. Got to tend to me own crops, you know. Money don't make itself. Hemp Inc.
Educator, author, and advocate Dr. Mitch Earlywine is here to tackle the burning issues.
Author Catherine Hiller and her great new book, Just Say Yes, Marijuana Memoir. So I love the way you use time in the memoir.
I started at the present time, and I described a visit to my dealer, and then I would go backward in time so that every chapter starts a little bit earlier. I do not feel that marijuana has in any way harmed my life. It certainly hasn't led me to the streets. It's led me to a more joyful life experience.
Burning Issues, only on CannabisRadio.com.
The Russ Belville Show, where the truth about marijuana gets more than a minute to speak.
New beginner guitars and banjos are often constructed much better than ones built before your time. Why struggle? Get a new instrument or fix the old one. The trusted professionals at the Fingerboard Extension will evaluate your instrument for free. Repairs are priced for people who work for a living. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today, or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com.
Promoting the end of adult cannabis prohibition is easy because we have facts, science, reason, compassion, evidence, truth, and logic on our side. It's even easier when researchers catalog it all for us. Learn how to gather the facts on marijuana use, arrests, seizures, rehabs, drug tests, and more on this edition of Drug War Data Mining.
Today in the Data Mines, we want to talk about the results of Marijuana Election Night 2016. We'll get to the states real quick, though. I want to talk a little bit about some of the smaller elections that happened. And unfortunately, on our live coverage, we weren't able to bring you these results. The citywide votes that happened in Ohio went 4 for 5. And these were votes to depenalize up to 200 grams of marijuana. 200 grams, folks, that's up to just about 7 ounces, a little over 7 ounces of marijuana. And it's been reported in some outlets as a decrim measure, that they decriminalized marijuana, but they didn't do that. So let's get the versions here straight. Let's get the definitions straight. Decriminalization is when the act is no longer criminal, but it could still be punished civilly. For example, decriminalization where you're caught, they confiscate your weed, you get a $100 ticket, but you don't get a criminal record. That's decrim, folks. Decrim generally means no arrest, no criminal record, but you could still be fined or punished or ticketed. Depenalization is where you can't be penalized or the penalty is reduced, but it's still a crime. You still have a criminal record. So what happened in these Ohio cities is depenalization. and I forget the names of all of them, but there were 5 cities that were voting on this. Toledo already passed it a year ago. And what they did is they depenalized under city code up to 200 grams possession, meaning it's still a minor misdemeanor. So it's still a crime to get caught with weed, up to 7 ounces. But the mandated fine is $0. And the mandated jail term is 0 days. And you can't be arrested. So there's no arrest and there's no punishment, but there's still a crime. And that crime stays on your record and can be problematic if you're trying to get jobs and security clearances and so on. Still, in a functional sense, what it means is that cops aren't bothering with weed possession much because there's not much benefit for them in doing so. Now, one of these cities, Newark, has already said, its police supervisors and such have already said they're not going to obey the depenalization. They're going to keep charging people under Ohio state law. Well, under Ohio state law, it's decriminalized up to 100 grams. There's no arrest, there's no criminal record, and it's just a $100 fine. So up to 3.5 ounces will still be good. Anyway, it's good to note that we got 4 out of 5 passage in these local measures because a lot of activists want to jump right to a statewide initiative all the time. They want to jump right to a state medical marijuana or a state decrim or something. Pass these local things first. Get a whole bunch of local wins under your belt. Then you've sowed the seeds that you need to pass something statewide. That's the way you did it in Massachusetts. Passed a lot of state or citywide public policy questions. Colorado, Denver passed a few things. In Washington State, Seattle passed the lowest law enforcement priority, etc. So think local and then work your way up to the statewide. Now, speaking of the statewide, the wins, of course, that we got were in California, Maine, Massachusetts, and Nevada. Officials in Maine are currently recounting. The win there was 50.2%, and the opponents wanted a recount, and it's going to cost about $500,000 for the taxpayers to discover once again that Maine legalized marijuana. So good on you, I guess. It's democracy, folks. If they want to call for a recount, that's fine. I'm really not even lamenting the taxpayer money being spent on it because to me, that's not a waste. It's not a waste to have a vibrant democracy. But the big winner, of course, California, coming in at 56.2%, blew away Oregon's 56.11%, beat our record. Although Anthony Johnson this weekend told me we still hold the record for a midterm election. So I think that's a fair thing to say. Also, Nevada and Massachusetts got passage there. In the state of Massachusetts, though, the Boston Globe is already suggesting to the legislature that they undo a lot of what they passed. They said, they passed it with home grow. Let's take home grow away. That would be bad. Oh, they passed it with the lowest taxes of the nation. Oh, that would be bad. Let's double them. So, and the Boston Globe says there's a lot of things the legislature could do to fix this bad pot law that wouldn't undermine the will of the people. Well, yeah, you're undermining the will of the people. The other thing they want to do in Massachusetts is Massachusetts gave all the cities the right to have pot licenses, except a city might vote to opt out. They want to reverse that. They want it to be that pot licenses are banned in every city unless a city votes to opt in. It's amazing how little these people cared about the intricacies of marijuana reform when it was completely prohibited. But once we pass it, oh boy, they got all sorts of ideas about how it should be treated now. Folks, the will of the people was to pass question 4 the way it was written. It's not as if the people will just pass any old pot initiative. We saw them reject Ohio Issue 3. We saw them reject Oregon Measure 80. We saw them reject Prop 19. If the people don't like an initiative, they'll reject it. This damn infantilization, this paternal instinct that some of these officials and editorial boards have over the voters. Oh, the voters can't possibly know what they voted for. What the hell? They don't know what they're doing. This has got to end. Now, of course, in the medical side, we got 4 for 4. I was stunned by this, too. I was predicting that we'd go 4 for 5 in the legal ones. I accurately predicted the legal states. I predicted Arizona would lose. But I only predicted Florida would win in the medical. I didn't think we would get medical marijuana in North Dakota, especially one that allows some home grow. It passed like 2/3 of the vote almost. And Arkansas passed. It was a close one, but they passed as well. And Montana voted to increase its medical marijuana program. We now have 1 out of 5 people living in a legal state and 3 out of 5 people living in a medical state. There's only 6 states left that have absolute marijuana prohibition: Idaho, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Indiana, and West Virginia.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
How high do you like your profit margin? CannabisRadio.com.
Great websites today need expert web design and development and need to be e-commerce ready and mobile friendly. But building a marketable and profitable website can be an uphill climb. Ready to make your new website or replace your existing website? Think Orange as the new way to get in the black. Orange Hill Development works with Fortune 500 companies and offer the same top quality development service at a fraction of what other providers charge. Brands like Absolute, Carlsberg, and Nestea trust Orange Hill Development. Find out why you should trust your website with Orange Hill. Contact Orange Hill for a consultation today at orangehilldevelopment.com.
Tokers, there's no good reason to get your dog stoned. While it might not harm them physically, imagine being a dog who already begs for treats all day, and then imagine that dog having the munchies. Not cool.
You're not high. You're listening to the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists. And some, I assume, are good people.
Okay. Maybe you're high, too.
The Russ Belville Show is proudly sponsored by the Marijuana Business Association. The MJBA, called by NBC News the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, is the fastest growing business association in the fastest growing industry in America. I've been working with the MJBA for years, and I personally invite you to join the MJBA. MJBA also publishes the popular MJ Headline News on Facebook and the MJNewsNetwork.com and Marijuana Channel 1 on YouTube. Visit mjba.net for more details. Reforming America's marijuana prohibition laws takes education, lobbying, and voting. From Washington, D.C. to your state capital to your city hall, marijuana law reform involves all levels of civic life. Learn how you can make your impact with elected officials as we take a look at our government at work. Today in Government at Work, I want to talk more about the impact of the 2016 presidential election. Leading up to it, there was a lot of debate about which of the candidates would be best for the marijuana industry, who would be best for marijuana reform. And of course, the best candidates for the marijuana industry were Jill Stein and Gary Johnson, who combined didn't even get 5% of the vote, as I predicted. So the realistic candidates, the ones who actually had a snowball's chance in hell to become president, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, we had to discuss who would be better for the marijuana industry. And I had numbers of people telling me that Trump would be better for the marijuana industry. And they pointed to a few things. They would say, number one, look at that statement Hillary Clinton made to Goldman Sachs. She was behind closed doors with Goldman Sachs and asked if she would sell short on legalization. She said, short in every respect of the word. Clearly, Hillary Clinton would be bad for the marijuana industry. They also pointed to her ties to the pharmaceutical industry and to big donors that might want to turn marijuana over to the pharmaceuticals. And that would be bad. On the other side, the people that were trying to convince me that Donald Trump would be good for the marijuana industry, people like Roseanne Barr, were telling me that Trump's all about states' rights. Trump has said that he loves medical marijuana, 100% in favor of it. And as far as Colorado and Washington, states that have legalized, he's for states' rights, laboratories of democracy, let them do their thing. And I was also told that Mr. Trump's a businessman. Surely he could see the green rush and the billions of dollars and the entrepreneurial spirit that would be going on in the marijuana industry. And that would be good, right? That's what I was told. So Trump gets elected. And what are some of the first things he does? He appoints Jeff Sessions as the Attorney General. Now, in my nightmare, I had been worried about Rudy Giuliani as an Attorney General or Chris Christie as an Attorney General. But Jeff Sessions goes way beyond my nightmare capabilities. We already discussed some of his opinions that good people don't smoke pot. The Klan was okay until he learned they were pot smokers and so forth. That letting legalization run rampant throughout the states, we need to put the adults in charge. We need to send a message to the kids. Jeff Sessions is as hard-line, old-school drug warrior as still exists in this country. So that's the first thing we get. And then as I continue to see more of these appointments, I continue to imagine just how bad it could get. First of all, we already talked about how the Cole memo is the only thing that's allowing the state legal marijuana commerce to commence. Up until the Cole memo happened, people wanted to jump in the pool, wanted to get in the green rush, were terrified they'd get raided, indicted, audited by the feds. Their life would be a living hell. Cole memo comes out. Green light. We're not going to mess with you as long as you obey the laws. Boom, we get a green rush. That Cole memo could be rescinded on January 21st. The day after the inauguration, we could have no more Cole memo. And imagine all the other positions that are going to get filled up here in the next few months. And keep in mind that the chief strategist helping out with this is Steve Bannon, former Breitbart guy. And imagine who he's going to pick for head of the DEA or the drug czar. Can you see a drug czar Kevin Sabet? I can. I can so clearly imagine that happening. A drug czar Kevin Sabet pushing all around the country to the legislatures out there that have states that have initiative power. I can just imagine Kevin Sabet going to them, telling them that medical marijuana, if we don't do something about it in the legislature, my goodness, they're gonna pass something we don't like. Call it Operation Ohio, right? Like issue 3 failed in Ohio, and then MPP tried to do a medical initiative, and then the Ohio legislature passed a shitty medical marijuana law to undercut it. That's what's going to happen across all the rest of the remaining initiative states where medical marijuana might have a chance to pass. Watch it get its legs cut up from under them by a drug czar, Kevin Sabet. How about some hardline conservatives to head up the FDIC and FinCEN, Financial Security Agency, right? How about more hardliners there in the banking and the finance industry willing to throw down some major fines and investigations into any of these banks that have been opening up checking accounts or providing services to the people that are laundering money, committing federal conspiracies, and trafficking in illegal drugs, at least from the perspective of the feds. How about IRS and Consumer Protection Bureau when we're dealing with complaints and taxation issues? How about heads of the EPA? Already he's decided to appoint an EPA head who denies climate change exists. Throw in a guy in the ag department. Let's get some people who'll be ruling on industrial hemp, be ruling on seed certifications, be ruling on pollution and other mandates. How about all of the U.S. attorneys? Now, people have said to me, they say, well, Russ, the people serve at the pleasure of the president. If Trump states rights, he can, give the directive down to these people that, hey, that's not what we want you doing. Oh, really? Oh, really? Like President Obama, who said we won't spend precious federal resources raiding the medical marijuana dispensaries in the state where it's legal. And yet somehow that directive didn't trickle down to Melinda Hogg, didn't trickle down to Ormsby, didn't trickle down to these people in the districts in Washington that prosecuted the Kettle Falls Five. Folks, you think Donald Trump is going to be hands-on making directives to all the people he's put in charge? Okay. The most terrifying thing, of course, that I think of is who's going to take that 9th Supreme Court spot, the one that Merrick Garland is supposed to be in. How about Ginsburg, Kennedy, and Souter all pushing 80 or in their 80s who might die or retire? These are the people that will ultimately decide all of the challenges to legalization, all of the challenges to the marijuana industry. Remember Kansas and Oklahoma suing Colorado? And the court just decided not to hear that suit? Don't bet on that again if there's a 7-2 Donald Trump-packed Supreme Court deciding whether or not to hear that. And on this states' rights issue, the one that people keep coming back to me, these states' rights, they'll support states' rights. Use some imagination. I got a pretty big imagination, and I thought of how could you totally screw over the marijuana industry and marijuana consumers and yet still say that you're supporting states' rights. My imagination went like this, that you'd have the Attorney General stand up there and say, states may be the laboratories of democracy, but we're going to ensure the experiment stays in the petri dish. Colorado and California may have legalized marijuana, but Kansas and Arizona have not. The citizens of those states deserve their states' rights to keep dangerous drugs illegal. Yeah, you could say states' rights for Colorado and California, and Kansas and Arizona are going to say, hey, we have our states' rights too, and we're being flooded by these nearby states infringing on our states' rights. So imagine the head of the DEA comes out and talks about Operation Petri Dish, our response to these states that have chosen to allow marijuana legalization. We've teamed up with Homeland Security to create a new series of border checkpoints along Idaho, Nevada, and California's eastern borders, Maine's southern border, and surrounding Colorado and Massachusetts. These will be staffed by DEA personnel that are no longer needed for investigation and raids in the West, and these checkpoints will act much like California's fruit and vegetable checkpoints. Folks, I drive down I-5 all the time. When you drive into California, about 4 miles across the border, they have these, it's like a toll booth, but you got to go through it. And an ag officer asks if you've got any fruit and vegetables with you. Seriously, like they're not looking for weed, they're looking for bananas and apples and shit. They're looking to see whether or not you're transporting in fruit flies and all sorts of harmful things. It's really no big deal. It's just a question and answer and you're through. But imagine that sort of situation. They've got all these DEA agents on the payroll. They got to do something with them. Why not sit them in a shack on California's eastern border, Idaho western border, waiting for people to come across the freeways and the highways and stop their car and see if it smells like weed. And, you're going to have all those drug-sniffing dogs, too. All the drug-sniffing dogs that get retired. Imagine the DEA throwing some burn justice assistance grants at these departments to purchase their drug-sniffing dogs, to use them at these checkpoints. Imagine that. I can. And they could easily say, hey, we're not interfering. We're not stopping California from having its legal weed. We're just stopping California's legal weed from making it into Arizona. That would be states' rights, wouldn't it? All right, stay tuned. When we come back, we'll have time for a radical rant dedicated to the memory of Chijioke Stephen Obioha when we return.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
Seed to sale, clicks to conversions, and more. You're listening to the Cannabis Radio Network.
The next generation of vaporizers has arrived. Vuber vaporizers are blazing the way with unparalleled technology for oil, concentrate, or dry flower pens. Providing unsurpassed customer service and expert craftsmanship, Vuber vaporizers use cutting-edge technology, providing a power-packed, smoother vapor with a lifetime guarantee. Experience vaporizing the way it was meant to be. The Vuber way.
Growing green to generate more green.
talking with multi-cup award winner Maya Elizabeth.
The Grow Show with Kyle Kushman.
I've always followed Whoopi, and I think she's fantastic. I've followed her advocacy over the years. Tell me a little bit how you think partnering with a mainstream high-profile figure actually benefits the cannabis community as a whole.
I have infinite respect for Whoopi Goldberg. I wouldn't just partner with any into that kind of thing. I'm into cannabis medicine, and I'm into making quality products that people can find relief from. So to hear that her vision was actually the same, it's been beyond a dream to manifest.
The Grow Show with Kyle Kushman, only on CannabisRadio.com.
This is the Russ Belville Show, annoying Kevin Sabet since 2012.
When you are starting up a medical cannabis business, you want a fired-up lawyer who understands the needs of cannabis consumers. The law office of Lauren Vasquez is your fired-up lawyer for the cannabis industry. Visit her website, fireduplawyer.com, or call 1-855-MMJ-LAWS for more information. That's 855-665-5297 for Lauren Vasquez, your fired-up lawyer, or email fireduplawyer@gmail.com.
We must wage what I have called total war against public enemy number one.
I support a change in law to end federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
That marijuana, pot, grass, whatever you want to call it, is probably the most dangerous drug.
Some think there won't be room for them in jail. We'll make room.
I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it and didn't inhale.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
Entirely legitimate topic for debate.
Radical Rant. Friday in Singapore, a soccer player was hanged by the neck until dead because he was in possession of almost 92 ounces of marijuana. That's why I support marijuana legalization, period. When Ohio's Issue 3 polarized the marijuana reform community last year, I was one of the few national reform voices, not just meekly offering half-hearted support, but I was out there cheerleading loudly for its passage. To be fair, my opponents had a solid point. Writing 10 investors into the state constitution to be the sole landowners where legal commercial cultivation could be licensed was a stunning exercise in regulatory capture that would make the 19th century robber barons proud. Issue 3's loss of more than 2-1 was no surprise to me, but it depressed me nonetheless. Because I'm not in this to save state budgets with marijuana tax revenue. I'm not in this to make pot growers rich. I'm in this to keep people out of cages for weed. Period. Chijioke Stephen Obioha is a Nigerian who graduated from Benin University with a degree in industrial chemistry. He traveled to Singapore for a tryout with a soccer club there. Singapore has some of the most draconian drug laws in the world, including capital punishment. Obioha traveled to Singapore in 2005 and was caught with 92 ounces of weed in 2007. Singaporean law says that cannabis possession over 15 grams is per se evidence of drug trafficking. The prosecutor doesn't have to prove Obioha's guilt. Obioha must prove his innocence. Amnesty International called for the halting of Obioha's execution, saying, quote, "By executing people for drug-related offenses which do not meet the threshold of most serious crimes, Singapore is violating international law," end quote. Indeed, the United Nations Human Rights Office for Southeast Asia noted that, quote, "Under international law, the death penalty may only be used for the most serious crimes, which has been interpreted to mean only crimes involving intentional killing. Drug-related offenses do not fall under the threshold of most serious crimes," end quote. Obioha was sentenced to death in 2008, making his 8 years on death row one of the longest such delays in Singaporean history. Singapore anti-death penalty campaign member M. Ravi stated that Obioha, quote, has faced unprecedented mental anguish, end quote. Ravi pointed out another Singaporean death penalty case where a, quote, delay of 5 years and 6 months, which had elapsed since an accused conviction amounted to cruel and unusual punishment and breached his constitutional right not to be deprived of life, end quote. Throughout his entire 9-year ordeal, Obioha has maintained his innocence. In 2010, his appeal was rejected, but in 2013, Singapore changed its death penalty laws, which opened the opportunity for Obioha to apply for resentencing. He rejected the opportunity for a life imprisonment for fear that doing so was tantamount to an admission of guilt. Obioha's brother explains what a shock this ordeal has been for the family back in Nigeria, saying, quote, "A whole part of the family has been missing since that date in 2007. I have always been in constant contact with him since his stay in prison, and he has always kept to his stance of innocence. A lot of both financial and physical effort has been made by our family toward his defense in previous years, but due to a lack of funds and restricted access to Singapore, it was difficult to carry on with his desire toward a defense lawyer. My brother deserves to live. His life is precious to us." End quote. Well, his life is no longer. He was executed Friday in Singapore. Now, what does that have to do with state legalization initiatives in the United States? Everything. There are too many people here, especially out here on the West Coast, who get caught up in this green rush thinking of who's going to get rich from legalization, who's going to lose business from legalization, and how will legalization affect medical marijuana? Well, to me, they sound like soldiers in a foxhole complaining that storming the muddy hill may get their uniforms dirty. This isn't just a war on drugs we're fighting, people. This is a world war on drugs we're fighting. Every battle we fight is just one small tactic in a larger theater of war. Poland isn't freed until we establish a beachhead on Normandy, and Japan isn't defeated until we take a whole bunch of Pacific islands. Likewise, Texas doesn't get legalization until California does, and Singapore doesn't stop executing marijuana traffickers until the United States busts the international drug control treaties. Chijioke Stephen Obioha hangs dead from a rope because our longest-serving drug czar, Harry J. Anslinger, began scaring the world about cannabis in the 1930s. This blood is on our hands. By 1952, Anslinger shepherded the Boggs Act through the U.S. Congress, establishing mandatory minimum possession sentences of 2 to 10 years for marijuana. Singapore's version was the Dangerous Drugs Act of 1952, which established mandatory minimum sentences of 3 to 5 years for marijuana possession. Yes, that's right. In 1952, the United States had a more harsh mandatory minimum sentence for marijuana than Singapore did. But to Anslinger's dismay, people increasingly kept using marijuana. So he got the rest of the world to sign on to the UN Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs of 1961. That was later amended by the Convention on Psychotropic Substances of 1971, and that led Singapore to pass their Misuse of Drugs Act of 1973. That's the act under which Obioha was sentenced to die. Now, under that act, under the Misuse of Drugs Act of 1973 in Singapore, that possession of a mere 15 grams of marijuana in Singapore means you're presumed to be a drug trafficker, guilty until proven innocent. And for that 15 grams, half an ounce, people, for that 15 grams, you will earn a punishment ranging from up to 24 strokes of caning. Now, you know caning, right? They take the rattan cane and whack your ass with it. And we're not talking swats on the butt from the principal. We're talking rip the flesh off your buttocks, leaving big red open welts type of caning. 24 swats with that. That's the minimum for a half ounce. All the way up to life imprisonment. Life for half an ounce, people. And as Obioha learned, at 500 grams, it becomes an automatic death sentence. 500 grams, automatic death sentence. The death of Chijioke Stephen Obioha and the deaths of 100,000 people in the Mexican drug war and the deaths of hundreds, thousands of people, mostly young, mostly black, shot in America by cops or by rival drug dealers or by cartels. All of these deaths are on us, the United States, for starting this world war on drugs. It's our obligation and our duty to end this war by any means necessary, even if Nick Lachey might get rich on it. And speaking of the death penalty for weed, don't cast aspersions on Singapore. Look down your nose at Singapore for being so barbaric as to execute people for marijuana, because right here in the United States, we have a death penalty for marijuana. I know, you're stunned, right? We have a death penalty for marijuana in the United States under federal law. Now, it's never been used. And it's a pretty high bar to clear. You got to have a continuing criminal enterprise. It's got to be more than something like 60,000 kilograms or $2 million a year or 20 million, something like that. It's a huge, huge number to clear. I mean, you got to be the Pablo Escobar of weed. But guess what? Folks in the green rush right now, folks that are running these warehouse grows in Colorado and in Washington State and Oregon, could easily clear that bar. There are people right now in America legally doing business under state law who under federal law are guilty of continuing criminal enterprises and conspiracies that could theoretically earn them the death penalty. Now, there are constitutional scholars who say that this statute in the Controlled Substances Act that mandates a death penalty for such huge kingpin type operations would probably be found unconstitutional. Probably is not something I would like to stake my life on, or would anybody in the green rush. So consider, if this Trump administration, if an Attorney General Jeff Sessions wanted to bring the hammer down, if they did want to put a chilling effect across the entire industry, can you imagine bringing some of these people up on the RICO conspiracy charges, bringing them up on the death penalty charges that are still within federal law? I don't think they're going to. I wouldn't want to predict that. I think the backlash would be too great. It would that'd be big overreach, right? It would do us more good than them. But do you want to bet on that? Do you want to like risk lives over that? Would it be declared unconstitutional? I don't know, by a 7-2 Trump court? I don't know. Nobody knows. But this is why we continue to fight, and why, for me, you got to come up with a really, really big deal breaker for me to oppose legalization. Because I know that every battle we fight, every time we go to the ballot box, is a battle we're fighting to try to end this war globally. And I'm afraid too many people don't take a big enough look at what's going on and don't recognize that marijuana is half of the entire drug war. Half of the arrests made are for marijuana. Without our numbers, there's not enough profit in continuing to prosecute the drug war. And these folks that think that it's all over, that we're in a post-prohibition era and Republicans are just going to fall in love with this money and they're just going to accept it, I think you're underestimating the power of prejudice and racism and the hatred people have for marijuana users. Have you been to America? We'll talk about it more here coming up in hour 2. We'll take your calls at 650-LEGAL-MJ. For everyone here at CannabisRadio.com, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it.